As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
To really create a connection, what you need is to actually go deeper than that, and has to be those why questions, like why do you feel like that? Why was that event so important for you? Like, what made it so moving? Like, if you did this thing at Halloween, like who were you spending that holiday with, and why were they important to you? Those are the things that we should really be looking at. I just think the research shows that in conversation in general, we just don't give enough of that information to create that shared reality.
That was David Robson on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are four experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas from psychology to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Jill to discuss my interview with David Robson on the loss of connection, a book that I absolutely loved, and I got a lot out of it. Jill, what were your thoughts listening to the interview?
Oh, Michael, I absolutely loved this interview. And, I think we know that we're living in this epidemic of loneliness and we are craving connection, and yet it feels like such a hard thing to do. So I just think that this topic was so timely, and you and David give the listeners an understanding of why it matters, and what we need to do to establish greater connections. And, one of the things you talk about is how important it is for people to really put themselves out there and to be vulnerable and authentic. And I was just thinking about how incredibly difficult that is to do. And I know for myself, I do try to do that because I genuinely understand that vulnerability is what is going to breed intimacy, and that is what breeds connection. So we just moved to this new city a year and a half ago, so I'm really in the heat of meeting new people, right? And I've been sharing a lot. And after every social interaction, even though I've had a great time, I'm constantly worried that it was TMI. Right? Like, they're going to judge me. I said too much. I can't believe I told them this super personal thing. And it was like our first date. And, the rules say you're not supposed to tell people those things till like your third date. And then I have this vulnerability hangover. And it's really uncomfortable to sit in that doubt. And then it makes me not want to do that the next time. I still do, but it requires a lot of pushing through that. Have you had that experience too?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So one big takeaway from the book for me was that what we feel was maybe a little bit off for the other person, that doesn't even register. That anything that makes us cringe a little bit in hindsight, if you ask the other person, they're like, yeah, I didn't even spot that. I wasn't even paying attention to this. or in terms of sharing something, the shared reality that he talks about in the book is that this is what actually makes people connect. People don't connect through talking about the weather or the small talk. People don't connect over the small talk. They connect over these things. And so, yeah, it has certainly necessitated some training and desensitization to that vulnerability hangover for me to allow myself to bring that stuff out. And I sometimes do this on these podcast episodes as well, where afterwards I'm thinking like, should we just edit that out? That was a little bit TMI. I'm not sure that fits in. And they're like, no, you know what? Like, I've learned this, leave it in. But mostly it's this understanding. Yeah, this needs to be in. This is the raw piece that shows people the real Michael or the real Jill in this sense.
It's so true. Well, we've even checked in with people. We've all checked in with each other about that. I mean, how many times has one of the four of us said to the other three of us, I think this was too much, TMI, I'm feeling this vulnerability. And whenever the three of us listen, we're like, no, that's actually the best part. So it's so easy to see it from the outside, but so much harder when you're experiencing it from the inside. And I think one of the things that's made me try to continue in this domain, two things. It's one main thing, which is I've been fortunate to get feedback from people. So I've met enough new people where they then say to me, God, I so appreciated how open you were. And it made me feel comfortable or safe, disclosing, they don't use that word because they're not psychologists, but, disclosing my personal information to you. And I do a lot of public speaking. And, I would go to workshops with some of our well-known act trainers like Ricky Kelgard and Kelly Wilson. And every single time they teach, they cry. They're very vulnerable. They're very personal. And it is the thing that makes me just love them and feel connected to them and trust them. And then it's my turn to get on stage. I'm like, oh, but I can't do that because everybody will think I'm a mess, right? They'll think I'm a basket case. I can't get emotional on stage. And when I finally started to let my guard down and really show up authentically and vulnerably, my good feedback went to really, really good feedback. That is the thing that even audiences, even when it's not like a one-on-one conversation, that is the thing that, my audiences will come to me saying, wow, like this was so powerful. Thank you for sharing your story, knowing that you had this experience. It resonates with people. And then if you can do this, maybe I can do this. It's more like inspiring and motivational and connecting.
If in a talk you wanted to present only facts, you could do with a slideshow and a PowerPoint presentation. And that would be it. Like what makes a talk so powerful is that there's an actual human being up there on stage. And if that actual human being up there on stage wants the excellent feedback, you better also disclose some of the things you've learned, you've gone through. I will add that it is usually a really good idea to only talk about those struggles you've kind of worked through. Don't talk about the struggles you're currently in and you're still like working through. But once you put the check mark behind them and you're like, you know what, I'm good on this, that's when it can go up on stage.
Well, it just occurred to me in this moment that I think a big part of what's happening is common humanity. It's like when we are able to see each other and the other person and know like we are all one, we are all in this together, we all struggle, there's like some bonding that happens there too.
Exactly. So if you want to hear all the amazing science behind the stuff that Jill and I actually just talked about, then I hope you will enjoy this interview with David Robson on the laws of connection. David Robson is a science writer and author based in the United Kingdom. A graduate of Cambridge University, he has worked as a feature editor at New Scientist and as a senior journalist at the BBC. And his writing has appeared in The Guardian, The Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, and many other publications. His previous book, The Expectation Effect, won the British Psychological Society Book Award for 2022. His latest book is The Laws of Connection, The Scientific Secrets of Building a Strong Social Network. David is a return guest. Yael has interviewed him on his previous book on episode 310. And 50 episodes later, I have the pleasure to talk with him about the laws of connection. Welcome back to the show, David. You're in the two-timer club now for Psychologists Off the Clock.
It's completely my pleasure. I love the last conversation with Yael, and I'm really excited about this one.
So in your book, The Laws of Connection, you did an incredible amount of sleuthing through high quality studies. Like it was more than 300 studies that you analyzed for the book. And so I just wanted to congratulate you on your diligence and your enthusiasm that rivals that of a supersonic bookworm. What made you write that book?
I guess like a social connection has been kind of a matter of interest to me from when I was very young, because I would consider myself to be quite an extrovert in that I really feel a strong need to be around people. Like I really thrive from talking to others and, knowing what other people think and feel. It's almost like they define the boundaries of myself. I feel if I'm alone for too long, like I'm kind of dispersing in some way. But I had that combined with being a very shy person. So actually, when I was a teenager, I had like a very close group of friends, but meeting new people, building new friendships was always quite difficult for me. And I felt like I got over that like a little bit when I became a journalist. But, it's always on my mind, like, what should we do to kind of optimize our connections to make sure they're as strong and authentic as possible? And then over the last 10 years, I just discovered there's been this whole torrent of research showing us exactly how to do that. So previous research on the loneliness epidemic, and we know loneliness is a terrible thing for, everyone, introverts and extroverts, whoever you are, loneliness is bad for our health. But previous research had kind of blamed that a lot on the modern environment, the society that we live in, and technology. But this new research was so exciting for me because it really looked at the psychological barriers. So the things that just prevent us from behaving in a way that's really going to enhance those connections.
And there are two concepts that you touch upon in the book that kind of set the basis of understanding for how communication works. And I thought that in order to set the stage for our listeners, before we dig a little bit deeper into the techniques and all the nitty-gritty little details, these two concepts that are kind of the basis of our understanding of communication, or misunderstanding of communication, I should rather say, is the concept of the shared reality and the liking gap. Could you give us an overview of what those two are?
Sure. Yeah. That's exactly how I see my book, that these two phenomena are like the foundation of all of the laws of connection that I talk about. Shared reality is quite simple and intuitive to define, I think, and that is just the sense that another person views the world in the same way that we do, and they react to it in the same way. So their thoughts, their feelings, their emotional reactions, they're very aligned with our own. So we know that, having a shared kind of background to someone else is itself very important. We're more likely to warm to someone of the same gender as us, the same sexuality, someone who maybe grew up in the same region, speaks the same dialect. We know all of these things are important. Similarly with like political opinions, we know that those factors are all important. But actually what I love about the idea of shared reality is that you can dig much deeper and you can see that it's also tiny little cues that suggest that someone's brain is just working on the same wavelength as your own. Do you laugh at exactly the same joke? Do you feel chills at exactly the same point in a particular song? That version of shared reality is much more powerful than just, say, having a similar music taste, like liking the same bands, but actually knowing that one particular point of a song moves you both at the same time. That is a very intimate form of shared reality. And we know that that really predicts liking in so many different circumstances. Now, the fact is we're all pretty good at creating a shared reality with people. We're much better than we think. And that's what brings us to the liking gap, which is the fact that you can have a really good rapport with a new person that you meet. You can have a great conversation. And then each of you can go away and start having doubts about whether the conversation was really as good for the other person as it was for you. So scientists have, put people into these situations. They've engineered those conversations. They've questioned both parties about how they felt at the end of the conversation. And what you find is that on average, each person believes that they liked the other person a lot more than the other person liked them. So in a sense, we're questioning the shared reality that we created, where we're kind of shaking that shared reality, and so it doesn't feel as strong as it could do. And then that is a barrier to connection later on, because it means we're less likely to ask for another meeting, to send an email, to, have a creative collaboration at work.
Thank you for explaining those two. So in my own understanding, like what really made the shared reality, as I read about it, really popped in my brain, and this was like one of those aha moments, is that for the first time ever, and I'm not sure how many listeners I'm going to alienate by saying this, but I'm not a sports fan. I cannot identify with teams. I don't get it how an entire like bus or train or tram is full of fans for one soccer game or whatever sport it is. But the shared reality explained it with like this, aha moment, because when you are a fan of the same soccer club, ice hockey club, I don't know what kind of sports are out there. That's how far my knowledge of sports goes. Mm-hmm. And you're a fan of the same club. So that means that you're in the stadium and something happens to your team or for your team, and it creates exactly the same shared reality for everyone around you. The goal is like, hey, we're all feeling good. The foul is like, oh no, we're all feeling down. We're all feeling outraged. And then you have the exact same thing happen as kind of like the polar opposite for the other team. So they're bonding together because it's not what bonds them together. And you correct me if I haven't gotten this completely right, but what bonds them together is that they're not all fans of the same team necessarily. That already helps. But what really bonds them together is at the exact same time, they go through the exact same emotional reactions because of the reality they're living in, their mind occupies.
Yeah, that's exactly it. They're all paying attention to exactly the same things. Like, that's important for shared reality, that you're noticing the same stuff. And then, if you all following the same team, you have the same goals for that team to win. And then you're feeling the same emotional trajectory depending on the course of the game. So I think that really does help to explain very succinctly why watching sports events can be such a strong bonding experience. But you can experience shared reality with complete strangers in lots of other situations. So if you go to a comedy club and you're all laughing at the same jokes, that's another way that you can kind of synchronize your brainwaves and form that shared reality. And I say synchronize your brainwaves because actually that's what the neuroscience tells us about shared reality, is that in some sense there's a kind of literal truth to the idea that people's brains are on the same wavelength, because you can see that the brain activity in certain regions is very closely matched between two people who like each other, who feel bonded, who've got that shared reality. You can take a whole class of graduate students at university, show them a bunch of clips on YouTube, for example, like comedy clips, music videos, documentaries, track their brainwaves, their brain activity as they're watching those clips, and you can then predict who are the closest friends within that group based solely on how similar their neural activity is. So the similar neural activity is really the neurological foundation, I think, to a shared reality.
This reminds me of something that I've learned as a public speaker, where I was informed by a speaker coach who prompted me again and again and again and said, Michael, like, don't just talk about the event, talk about how the event made you feel. Talk about that. And I was like, yeah, we can talk about emotions and all of that stuff, but the really exciting things is all the data that actually happened, right? That's the exciting thing. Like, I don't know how high the plane was flying as I was skydiving, how high the tower was I jumped off. That's the exciting stuff. Like, no. We need to know what it was like to fall out of a plane, to jump off of a tower, and all of that's what we need to know. And it made me realize something, that if we talk about those internal states, these private events, the thoughts, the emotions, the memories that these things bring up for us or brought up for us, what we're doing is we're giving the other person a really unique look into what our world looks like. So, for example, if you, David, and I, if we had the exact same travel itinerary through Paris, exactly that we're doing exactly the same stuff, separate from each other, and then at the end, we both write a report and we talk only about the data. Now, we both went to the Louvre, we both looked at 312 paintings, then we walked down the Seine, and then we did that, and then and that. Now, we would deliver exactly the same report at the end of it. But now if we talk about these realities, these internal realities, and we talk about the things we were thinking, the things we were feeling as we were walking down the Seine, as we were walking through the Louvre, now we will have two completely different stories that we're telling, or, well, more or less like different. Like maybe what really stood out for you is the smile of the Mona Lisa. And what really stood out for me, it was like eating garlic snails in a restaurant. I don't know, just randomly making things up. And the magic happens when those things overlap and we realize that we didn't just do the same things. We reacted exactly in the same way to the same things. And so for me, and this is a question I want to direct at you as well, because I think there might be a big takeaway here. So what I've learned is that as I'm talking with people, as I'm giving answers to questions like, how was your weekend? How was your holiday? And so on, I purposefully make a point in addressing my thoughts and emotions that were happening as I was going through things. I was purposefully highlighting what I was thinking, what I was feeling as I was going down the Seine or whatever. Do you have any insights into creating that shared reality, or putting more of an intention in creating such a shared reality?
Yeah, I think that's one of the kind of big barriers to connection that I talk about is we tend to be too reserved. Like on average, people are too scared about revealing their innermost thoughts and feelings, exactly the kind of emotional reactions that you need to create a shared reality. So the research actually shows that this comes down partly to a fear that the other person just won't be interested in hearing, what you're feeling, what you're thinking. So, especially when meeting strangers, we tend to just keep our conversation very superficial and shallow. It could be things like, what did you do last Halloween? What profession do you do? Stuff that touches on the kind of, I guess, the identity questions of like who you are, and the practical question of like, what have your movements been? But to really create a connection, what you need is to actually go deeper than that, and has to be those why questions. Like, why do you feel like that? Why was that event so important for you? Like, what made it so moving? Like, if you did this thing at Halloween, like, who are you spending that holiday with, and why were they important to you? Those are the things that we should really be looking at. I just think the research shows that in conversation in general, we just don't give enough of that information to create that shared reality.
Yeah, a classic conversational air quotes hack that I work on with my clients is to always finish a sentence by adding the why. So if I were to be asked, like, Michael, what's your favorite food? I could say spaghetti. And that's it. Now it's back to you. Please ask me the next question. Or I could say, well, it's spaghetti because my grandma used to make spaghetti for me when I was sick, and I could stay at home and I could lie on the couch and not do anything and stay home from school, and my grandma would make me spaghetti, and that's why spaghetti is my favorite food. And now I've just given you an insight into who Michael is as a person. By the way, completely random example. I don't like spaghetti, but that was the first thing that came to mind.
No, yeah, it's exactly that. And also, I think describing the sensual parts of an experience are really important too. If you're describing your holiday, what did it actually feel like to be, like the example you gave, to be walking along the Seine? Or if you say like how special it was to eat snails in a French restaurant, what was it like eating them, and why did you find that such a satisfying experience? I think we just often don't give enough detail. The first phenomenon I spoke about was really not engaging in enough self-disclosure to cement our relationships. I think a second related phenomenon is called the novelty penalty. And this is the strange fact that actually people prefer to hear familiar subjects compared to unfamiliar subjects. So if you're describing a holiday to a location that someone hasn't been to before, often that can be a real turn-off. Like, they will actually lose interest because they don't have enough to latch onto. The researchers showed this in quite an ingenious way. They got like groups of people to watch one of two different YouTube clips. So one was on like the intelligence of crows, the other was on kind of how to make the best ice cream or something like that. And then one member of the group had to kind of relayed the video that they had seen to the other members of the group. And what they found was that people tended to prefer hearing the speaker talk about something they had already seen. And like, why would that be interesting when, they're not learning anything new? But the researchers suggest it's because we have lots of like holes in our storytelling. So we're just not giving enough information when we're conveying a new experience for people to really understand like why that should matter to them and why it was important to us and why we found it interesting. And so actually, when we fear that other people won't be interested, like maybe we're not giving enough information rather than giving too much information. It could be that we're missing out all those little details that might actually bring that event to life and help the other person to relive it with you and to create that shared reality.
Hey, Michael here. As you might have already heard, I'm currently working on a book on confidence building, having better conversations, and making friends. Would you like to work with me to make this happen? I don't know about you, but I like self-development books that aren't just about the theory and the exercises. I like books that are full of real stories and insights from people who have worked through the concepts and have gotten the results they wanted. And that's how I envision my book too. So I'm looking for a handful of coaching clients to work with me over the next couple of weeks. If you struggle with confidence or your social skills, we can work together for 8 weeks in one-on-one coaching sessions that are tailored towards your specific goals. And your story will, anonymously, of course, be featured in my book and help and inspire others. I'm only going to work on this with 10 people, and as a thank you, offer 50% off my coaching package. If you think this is for you, then head over to herald.coach/book and apply. That's all. Back to the show. The other big concept, which I want to come back to, the liking gap, the idea that if two people talk with each other, then person A is going to say, I really like the other person, but I don't think that person liked me that much. And person B would say exactly the same thing. And this is apparently an effect that lasts for quite a couple of months before people actually sync up to the real level of likability. And so the question here is also, what do we make of this? Is it just a general sense of optimism that after a conversation we can rest assured that the other person likes us probably twice as much as we initially feel? How do we work with that information? What do we make of it?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I have found that just knowing about the existence of the liking gap has been incredibly transformative. So part of my shyness and social anxiety before hadn't just been about being scared of talking to people. Often it was like kind of agonizing over the kind of faux pas that I believed I'd made and looking at any kind of awkward moment in the conversation and believing that, like, one, it was my fault, and two, it would really stick in the other person's mind and cause them to judge me negatively. So any kind of clumsiness, I felt like I was very self-critical about that. And I think that's a very common experience, actually. In fact, I think that's driving the liking gap. The research, in all kinds of different situations shows that we tend to just believe that other people are judging us for things much more than they actually are. And so we go away ruminating on those things. And that fuels this sense that actually, even though we liked the other person, they didn't like us so much. But, the research suggests the other person probably isn't thinking about the same things that you are at all. In fact, if anything, they're probably mulling over their own errors in the conversation, the ones that we have completely forgotten about. What people mostly care about, it seems, is not whether you're like the most perfect, witty, fluent speaker, but it's actually whether you were warm, whether you were curious, whether you were interested, whether you were validating, like when someone told you something that mattered to them, if you kind of acknowledged that fact and where appropriate, agreed with their interpretation of events. These are the things that really matter. It doesn't matter if you don't always have that witty response to something that someone said, or if you repeat a word or you forget something important. What really matters is to have these good intentions to make the other person feel as comfortable as they can be and to create that shared reality. So yeah, I found that very comforting to hear about this. And, that certainly went a long way to kind of curing my own shyness. But I think what the research also tells us is that actually having practice at these kinds of social interactions with people that we don't know can really help to just reduce our general anxiety over these situations. There was a study that looked at this kind of scavenger hunt where people were told each day to kind of find someone new who, say, had amazing hair or a really cool t-shirt or like an adorable dog in the park, and to just go and strike up conversation with that person. Lots of people felt very anxious beforehand. They assumed that the conversations would be quite awkward. But after only 5 days, they'd already started to recalibrate their expectations to realize that the conversations were going to be far more enjoyable than they expected. Then those feelings lasted for at least a week afterwards. And I think this addresses a really important point with our social skills, is that perhaps we rely too much on just getting our social connection from the people we know very well, but that's not really helping us to recalibrate our expectations so that we feel more confident in unfamiliar situations. You know, you might talk to a stranger and try to start a new conversation, you know, even if you only do it once every week or once every month. That feedback that you're getting when you realize it was much better than you thought it would be, it's not really being reinforced enough. It's not, we're not cementing that in our minds. And that's why I think we really do need to try to practice these skills, you know, daily, if possible, by setting up the intention to, you know, just to do something like make conversation with your barista, or to talk to someone, you know, in the line at the supermarket.
Well, I might be myself just skewing the statistics on that in a non-insignificant way, because this is something that has become my bread and butter, to make people talk with strangers, whether it's giving them a compliment, telling them a joke, asking for high fives or whatever, just as a way to give them some social exposure. And the reporting back always is one of three things. It's either, well, this was really great, I had no idea it would be that much fun, or it would be, and this is like in the 10% area, it's like, you know what, didn't go that well, but actually I don't mind. Like, it didn't go as well, and I thought that would be totally horrible, but in reality it's just like, nah, just didn't want to talk with me. And the third one is like, you know what, this really went a little bit off, and we both had like an amazing chuckle and we're both shaking our heads. It's like, okay, I've learned that even when most of the time, 90% of the time, like, this is really fun and exciting and eye-opening. And then even if it goes wrong, it's like, yeah, come on. Like, you know, that's water under the bridge. Like, that doesn't really have much of an impact. And it's probably more because of the situation than of the conversation. So that person might have just been stressed, had a bad day, missed their bus, missed their train, I don't know, going through a really difficult situation. And then I walk up to them and I want to tell them a joke. Yeah, of course, that doesn't go too well.
Yeah, I mean, so that's another kind of strategy that I try to use that comes from the scientific literature, and it's called kind of defocusing. And that is just recognizing all of the factors that could influence someone's impression of you beyond the words that you say. And that's incredibly important for us to remember, because actually we do have that tendency to be overly concentrated on just our own performance, as if like we alone have the responsibility to kind of make the interaction as pleasant and as exciting or interesting as possible. But obviously, like you say, the other person might be in a bad mood, they might have got no sleep, they might be really distracted by something else that's happening. We could take the pressure off of ourselves with this, and that actually, I think, is going to make the interaction go a lot more smoothly if we aren't kind of totally alert and vigilant, believing that we alone are going to control, you know, the flow of the conversation.
So since we're deep into conversation techniques and topics, in your book, you cover the art of conversation as well. So let's lift the veil on that one. What makes us an artisan of conversations?
Yeah, so I think we've spoken about a couple of points that are important. So self-disclosure is incredibly important. And by that, I mean revealing our innermost thoughts and feelings that allow you to create this shared reality. I kind of see it's almost like our conversation could be like a space probe that's kind of in orbit around a planet, but actually you want the space probe to actually land on that planet. And we can only do that by practicing self-disclosure. That research comes from strategy called the fast friendship procedure, where essentially the researchers just got some people to talk about those superficial topics of conversation, like what's your favorite film? What did you do at Halloween? Compared to conversation prompts, they were just much more probing that each person had to discuss with their partner. They were kind of quite bizarre conversation prompts. It could be things like, do you have an intuition about how you're going to die? And you'd be surprised by how many people do. I mean,
it's a great conversation opener.
Right, yeah, exactly. But I think you do get something kind of meaningful from that, actually. What's your biggest embarrassment? What one thing could you change about your life, and why would you change it? If you had a crystal ball, what would you ask that crystal ball to tell you about your life and your future, and why? So all of these things that, are quite revealing, and beforehand, people are really nervous about those conversations. They think they're going to be a lot more awkward than the small talk, but in general, people enjoy the conversations more, even when it's with a complete stranger, and they feel much closer by the end. And the effects are quite striking. If you look at the tests of interpersonal closeness, what you find is that after 45 minutes of discussing these points of self-disclosure, people often feel as close to this stranger as they do to some of their oldest acquaintances. So it really does put you on the fast track to intimacy.
So here's the follow-up question, and I'm really curious what your thoughts are on it, and I'm going to compare them to my own experience. I'm curious to see how the science lines up, because as I was saying, do you have any intuition on how you're going to die? Is not something I'm going to ask the person that checks me out of the grocery store, right? It's not something I'm going to ask my Uber driver, or next time I'm calling a sibling. It's like, this is the opening question. Well, with a sibling that would actually work because they know my sense of humor. But there we have this transition of you talk about the probe that's orbiting the Earth, but at one point needs to land through self-disclosure and opening and asking non-superficial questions that probe into those private experiences, creating that shared reality. Now, there needs to be some sort of transition so that we don't actually start with this self-disclosure, this vulnerability, these curious questions. There needs to be this, hey, David, how was your weekend? What do you think about the weather? It's raining again, right? Yeah. There's this like normal small talk warming up to a stranger. How does the transition happen?
Yeah. So, I mean, to be honest, I think say I've got a partner, but if I were to go on a first date with someone, I may well just try out on one of those dates. I might say, I've heard these questions can be very revealing and help you to form a bond. Do you want to try a couple of them and see what someone says? I think if you give context, it's much better to try the self-disclosure prompts than if you just come out of the blue, like you said to your Uber driver. You're like, by the way, take me to London airport, and also, how do you think you're going to die? It's that I don't think that's going to go down very well. But who knows?
It's worth a try.
I think I'd love to see a study where they actually got someone to do it totally out of context. But in other situations, I think it's more just applying the principle of self-disclosure rather than using these questions as this kind of, algorithm for creating closeness. So actually, I just think it's when someone reveals something about themselves, you can just ask them to go a bit deeper into that. So if they say what their profession is, just asking, why did you choose that profession? What do you like about your profession? What do you not like about your profession? Have you ever thought of any other jobs that you would have liked to have done but haven't, or that you would like to change to in the future? I think those are the kinds of questions we can be asking that just moves the conversation on, shows curiosity in the other person, and encourages self-disclosure. And similarly, when we're talking about ourselves, because I think it's a two-way street. It's not all about learning about the other person. We need to be telling the other person about ourselves. If someone asks a question that maybe gives the opportunity for self-disclosure, we should take that opportunity rather than just kind of giving the kind of basic surface level details.
Yeah, I've often experienced that in a conversation, there seems to be this, both parties are thinking, I just hope the other person starts opening up so that I'm allowed to do the same.
Exactly.
And then you have two neighbors who for 10 years talk about nothing else but the weather, because no one takes that kind of first step. And I find that this step can be done in either by self-disclosing or by asking a question that in and of itself shows our own vulnerability a little bit. Like with those follow-up questions, like me asking you, have you ever thought of changing your career into something different? Now, this is not a very vulnerable question. I'm not asking you how you think you die or want to die. I'm asking you like on a scale of vulnerability from like 0 to 10, this might rank as a 1.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit of vulnerability compared to what do you think about, the rain or the upcoming weekend. And this is already opening a little bit of vulnerability. And then for the small talk aspect, I'm curious to know if there's any studies that look into this, because this for me comes from personal experience, not from digging through the literature. And that's the small talk is something that is important in a conversation. It fills a certain function because it fills the function of, first and foremost, it lets me know if you're actually interested in having a conversation with me. It's like approaching a dog and checking, is the dog wagging its tail, yes or no? Because small talk is a very easy way for you, as the victim of my conversation approach, to politely reject me. So small talk gives me the idea, is the other person actually interested in talking with me, or are they brushing me off? Second is it lines us up in terms of like an energy level. So if you see Michael on a party on a Friday evening, I'm bubbly, I'm full of energy, I'm super happy, I'm like bouncing around. Now, if I'm talking with someone who just had a bad day at work, needs to work the weekend, they're going to be down. So our conversation is not going to work out too well because I'm all bubbly, I'm all happy, the other person is down. So give it a little bit of small talk, and we can sync up a little bit.
Yeah.
And then lastly, finding that sense of commonality of what do we have in common? Even if it's only, hey, we're actually at the same museum, we're at the same Starbucks pool, we have something in common. So you got the other person is interested in having a conversation. There's no rejection. We synced up over a couple of questions in terms of energy, and now we have something in common as well. Now small talk is over. Let's move into the good questions. Let's move into self-disclosure.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, we should allow conversations to progress organically. And like you say, we should be really sensitive to the other person's energy levels, whether they are kind of giving us the brush off, they might just be a little bit shy of themselves and they don't want to, if they don't feel comfortable talking to a stranger, there's no benefit is going to come from you kind of pushing someone to have a conversation when they don't feel at ease with you. But I just think this is like having a tool at hand. The idea of self-disclosure and knowing its importance, we can, once we know about that importance, we can decide when we should choose to apply it. And the research suggests that we should apply it more than we currently do, but that doesn't mean that we should be doing that, every time we approach someone with a cute dog in the park. Actually, there's some benefit from just having that very superficial small talk with someone for 5 minutes. It's still going to leave you feeling better. It'll probably leave the other person feeling better too. That's what the research shows, that even conversations with weak ties can be really good for our well-being without us having any intention of that other person ever becoming like a major part of our life. But the fact is that the more, weak ties you cultivate, and the more strangers that you do speak to, the more chance there is maybe of finding those people who will become lasting friends as well. So it's all a matter of like creating opportunities for connection. And I think that's really the kind of moral of my book, that I realized very early on while writing it. It's just that we lose a lot of opportunities for connection because of these psychological barriers, like the liking gap, like our fear of disclosure, that just stop us from reaching out in a way that could allow a friendship to develop very naturally.
Yeah. And I have to smile because we're basically telling people to go out and talk with strangers, which is the exact opposite of what you hear when you're a kid.
Right.
So, dear kids listening, go talk to strangers. Just don't climb into their vans.
Right. Yeah, maybe if you're a kid, talk to strangers of your own age. Just don't talk to adults.
That's a good one. Thanks for clarifying that. So I wonder if I could throw a couple of questions your way. And They're not necessarily in the book. So I'm throwing you a curveball, and let's see how what shows up for both of us in terms of how we would handle these situations, because I'm genuinely curious about this. If you're talking with someone who really has some bad conversational behaviors, they might get distracted, they're looking over your shoulders, they're checking their phone, they're talking only about themselves, how would you correct these mistakes or misbehaviors in someone you're talking to?
I think we can try to be charitable, first of all, and to recognize that there could be many reasons for the other person displaying these bad conversational skills. Like if someone keeps on checking their phone, it could just be that they are super rude, or it could be that they're bored of you. Well, if that's the case, you don't really want to kind of continue the conversation with them. But it could also be that they are waiting for really important news from a loved one. Like maybe a family member is pregnant and about to give birth, and they're really worried about missing the call. Or it could be that they're really hooked on some kind of news event that's personally very important to them. So I do think taking a charitable view of people is often the best way to behave for the other person, but also for ourselves. Because I think if you consider all of those different possible factors, it does stop us feeling that we're responsible for those problems, which I think will give us more social confidence. But we can try our best to, if, for example, someone is talking too much about themselves, well, that might also be a sign of their kind of shyness, that they are so nervous they're kind of gabbling a bit, and we could maybe try to just bring the conversation back to ourselves. Or if we find them boring, we might actually recognize we're suffering from the novelty penalty. So we might recognize that maybe the problem is that we're just not engaging in the right way, and we're not asking the right questions to make it personally relevant and interesting to us. So, there are all kinds of things that we can do to try to understand where the person is coming from. But ultimately, I think, we also don't have the responsibility or need to kind of make conversation with someone when it's really not rewarding to us. So feel free to just make a polite excuse to walk away if you're really not getting what you need, because there might be plenty of other people in the room who will make it much easier for you to form a connection.
David, you're clearly the Buddha of conversation, where I'm rather like an angry looking sock puppet. I would indeed. Very well put, very well put. But yeah, I totally agree with you. It makes sense to look for why the other person might be behaving in this regard. So here's a little twist on the same question. What if you're talking with someone and you're utterly bored out of your mind? What now?
Okay, so there I think is the understanding of the novelty penalty is definitely relevant. So, question like, are you bored just because this is an unfamiliar experience to you? And even though it's really meaningful to the other person, you just don't have a way to connect it to your life. And if that's the case, then I think we can try to direct the conversation with suitable questions to try to fill in some of those gaps in their storytelling to make it more, to make it easier for us to kind of enter that shared reality. So earlier on, we were talking about the importance of understanding people's emotional reactions. Why is that so important to you that you feel the need to tell me about that event? So I think that's where we can really improve our own conversational game, because actually what the research shows is that on average, people just don't ask enough questions in conversation. We definitely don't ask enough follow-up questions. So we don't really show our engagement with the other person by kind of probing the details of what they're experiencing. So actually just with the act of asking those questions, showing that you're genuinely interested in getting a better hold of what they're telling you, that's actually a very charming way to behave, which is probably going to improve your likability to the other person. But I think conversely, it's also probably going to make them a bit more likable to you, because you'll understand where they're coming from much better that way. If that doesn't work, I think, feel free to move on, or to try to find a subtle and tactful way of moving the conversation to a topic that is more mutually of interest.
Like looking them in the eyes, saying you're boring, and then turning around on your heel and walking off. That would have been my sheesh, David, you're so much more nicer than I am. For me, being bored in a conversation comes down to who am I talking to? Is it my grandma, or is it a stranger on the street? One will get a lot of nicety and understanding from me, and the other won't. So if my grandma is listening to this, I'm sorry. No, of course my grandma gets the patience and the nicety. The stranger will either be cut off and ignored, or being bored in a conversation, especially if it's with a stranger and it happens respectfully. Being bored in a conversation is already a conversation that's written off to a certain degree. And here I'm really just talking small talk with a stranger. I'm not like having a meaningful discussion with my brother. That's not a conversation I'd say, okay, this one is, written off anyway. It's this getting ice cream. I'm talking with a stranger. I'm clearly bored in this conversation. There's nothing more to lose here. So let's practice some things. Maybe I'm in a conversation, I'm a little worried about making eye contact, and I'm constantly like looking at the ground. Well, in this conversation, I can now practice this because there's nothing to lose anymore anyway. Maybe I'm a little worried about making pauses while I speak. Well, here's an opportunity to practice this. Maybe I'm a little worried about probing, asking deeper questions, or sharing more about myself. Guess what? Here's a really great opportunity to practice it, because the conversation is, for the better or worse, kind of done anyway. Like this would die out in a couple of seconds anyway. So why not turn it into a little bit of a training environment, respectfully, of course. Like don't throw stuff around just to see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. And I quite enjoy the challenge, actually, when I'm having a conversation with someone who I find quite boring. I quite enjoyed the challenge of trying to make it more interesting and trying to kind of, smooth over the awkwardness. I think it can be quite cognitively demanding, actually, to do that in a conversation. So, you're giving yourself a bit of a brain workout, I think, by doing that. But like you say, respect is everything. And actually, when I view other people being rude to someone because they consider them to be boring, like nothing is a bigger turnoff for me, actually, than seeing someone engage in that kind of disrespectful behavior. Like I much prefer the person who's maybe being a bit boring to the person who is rude to that person because of that. Because, we all have bad days as well. So, it's a warning sign to me. If someone's willing to be rude to like a stranger in that way, then I also don't want to be friends with them, really.
Dale Carnegie, this one comes back in conversations again and again and again. In order to be interested, you need to be interested in the other person. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like I think as a writer, he had a huge amount of talent in that his books have obviously appealed to millions of people. But I do think the science has kind of moved on considerably, since he wrote his books, which are based on life experience and anecdote. And so some of what he says, I think, is outdated. And I do think he was right that we should be interested. Like curiosity in other people is one of the most charming traits you can have, for all the reasons that we've spoken about. So that is absolutely true. I think he overemphasizes the point a little when he almost suggests that you should just ask, you should ask questions and allow the other person to speak for the majority of the conversation. But we really know now that's not the case. And actually, you can still be very likable, even if you take up most of the airtime in a conversation. There is research showing that, but you don't even need a perfect 50-50 split, although ideally, I think that's what we should be aiming for. But it's not the case that we should only be questioning the other person without giving anything of ourselves away. It's called a dialogue for a reason, and we should be self-disclosing as much as the other person, because we want them to have the chance to recognize that their experiences are validated in what we're telling them. And you can only have that if you are willing to share some of your own vulnerability. So yeah, I'm not dissing Dale Carnegie, but I think we now have a much more precise understanding of some of these things that he speaks about.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree on this. And to me, this quote, if anything, also highlights a big aspect of conversations for me, and that is that it's not, we're in a dialogue. Like you said, there's two people. It's not my job alone to keep this thing running. Like, this is a multiplayer game. This is two people being involved. And it's not up to me to like win this by being afterwards the most interesting person in the room. Because what if I'm not interested in what the other person has to say? What if I completely disagree? What if I think they are disrespectful, rude, or whatever, in whatever way or manner, and like totally not in line with someone I want to have in my life? Like, there's no need for me to be interesting or interested at this point. It doesn't line up.
Yeah, exactly. And so something that we haven't really spoken about is the huge benefits of social connection for our health and well-being. You know, when people feel that they are understood and supported by the people around them, you know, it influences everything from their life satisfaction to, you know, their risk of heart attack and stroke and Alzheimer's disease and, you know, their risk of common infections. Because when we feel social connected, basically lots of physiological processes like the stress response are kind of subdued because we feel more safe and secure. The body doesn't have to be constantly prepared for the risk of attack, for example. But you're only going to experience those benefits if you truly feel the connection with the other person. And I would argue that actually, if you are trying to kind of game your relationships in the way that maybe Dale Carnegie is kind of suggesting, or like you said, you're only trying to charm the other person, but you're not necessarily trying to get them to understand you in return and to feel that two-way connection, then I don't think you're going to have all of those benefits. You might be the kind of person that ends up having lots of acquaintances, but you still feel very lonely because you don't feel that anyone actually has entered your inner life and has taken the time to kind of see who you really are. So yeah, it goes both ways. And is only when we have the connections that go both ways with the support and understanding of ourselves, as well as our support and understanding for the other person, that we're really going to have all of those health benefits.
Now, here's the thing. We've only barely touched upon the first part of your book, which goes into the science, the conversations, the art of the conversation. I would have so loved to talk with you about the power of compliments and gratitude. Dear listener, grab the book. But here's the thing. The second part of your book is like a go-to toolbox for problematic areas in life. So part 2, the title of this, Maintaining Connections, and you talk about lying and secrets and how to deal with that, envy, asking for help, healing bad feelings, conflict, and forgiveness. So this is like a first aid kit of, I struggle in this area right now with a certain person. Let me go into this topic that David wrote and apply the techniques and findings that just for my own benefit, because this is something that I struggle with so much. Let's, in the last few minutes that we have, let's dig into asking for help. That's very curious about that. This is an area in my life that I definitely need to work on.
Right. And I think so many of us do. So I think lots of us just struggle by ourselves without reaching out to other people when we need kind of favors or, you know, even major support in our life. And there are lots of reasons for that. We worry about demonstrating weakness if we ask for help. We worry that we might be kind of burdened to the other person if we ask for help. We kind of worry about being rejected, and we assume that the other person just won't have the time or the capacity to help us. You know, most of these worries are completely unfounded. So there's lots of research by people like Vanessa Bones and Nicholas Epley that showed that people in general are much more willing to help us than we assume. Vanessa Bones' work, you know, looked at this in all kinds of areas, from like asking someone to lend their phone to you when you've run out of battery, to asking someone to take you to actually, like, not just give you directions, but take you to a particular location, right through to things like charity fundraising. And on average, people are about twice as likely to help you as you think. You have to ask half as many people as you assume to get the support that you require. Now, what I love about the kind of the way this has then been extended in other research is that not only is the other person often delighted to be able to help, and they get a kind of well-being bonus to themselves for having performed altruistically. It's actually good for their happiness and health to be supportive, which is maybe one of the reasons why people are much more willing to do it than you would think. Not only is there that, but it actually cements the connection between us. So when you ask someone for a favor, they tend to like you more than if you hadn't asked them for the favor. And especially amongst close acquaintances, not asking for the favor could actually be a little bit insulting. Like if I go to visit New York City and I don't even raise the possibility of staying with one of my friends there and instead pay a lot for a hotel, they're going to start asking, well, like, what, have I offended David? Have I, why does he not feel that he could just ask me that? And there's what I've been especially interested in is that there's this Japanese concept of am I, which is when you ask your friends or relatives for those kind of favors that you could potentially do yourself. So it could be like asking your partner to kind of make you a cup of tea when you're perfectly capable of going to the kitchen yourself, or to cook your favorite meal, or to ask your friend to give you a lift to the airport, even though you could take public transport. It might be a bit more inconvenient, but you're perfectly capable of doing that yourself. And what the research shows is that actually practicing am I in this way, it really does help to cement how close you are to that other person. We don't have a name for it in the same way that they do in the Japanese language, but the research suggests that it's actually a universal experience. So people in the US are just as likely to benefit from these am I requests as people in Japan. So I think we could all enhance our relationships and make our own life a lot easier if we just added a little bit of am I to our own lives.
Ask more for help, and that way make your own life easier, and also have those that actually help you benefit as well. It's like a win-win situation for everyone except for the Uber driver and the hotel whose room you're no longer renting. So you're welcome. I had this extreme example of this also tying into the liking gap with I like to give my clients that work on their confidence or communication skills little homework assignments to push them outside of their comfort zone, or do it with them during workshops. And I had this one experience where there's this one homework that I like to give clients that really want to push themselves. They're like they've done all the stuff I've thrown at them, and the last hurdle I have for them is that I ask them to go out into the streets and ask people for so outrageously weird things that they must get rejected. And then it's like get rejected 10 times by asking people, can I have your dog? Can I try your shoes? Can I have your hat? Can I drink your coffee? Can I eat your ice cream? So the idea is really to get rejected here, which is quite tough because it really pushes a couple of human buttons that we don't like to be pushed at all. And this lady comes back like 2 minutes later, and she's wearing a new hat, and she's holding a coffee in one hand and the ice cream in the other. And she goes like, Michael, this is not working. Like, I'm doing something wrong. Yeah. And so asking for help. Like I've seen so many people even to the weird requests from strangers, and with a smile and a laugh offer their help. And yeah, there's like am I seems to be the only thing that can explain behavior like that. Like it's amazing how willing people are to help with the most ludicrous and weird requests, if they're just being asked to help.
Yeah, totally. And so I think we have to be a little careful about how we practice this, because we can't exploit that willingness.
Of course.
And so that is something that Vanessa Bones, the researcher behind some of this research, had kind of looked into. And it's, people are much more likely to kind of benefit psychologically and physically from giving help if they feel they've had complete autonomy in making the decision. Like pressurizing someone into doing something they don't want to is actually going to be very bad in lots of different ways. It's unlikely to enhance your connection, and it's also just going to add to their stress. So, I think it's important that actually we can often give people good, ready, we can give them plenty of opportunity to say no, actually. So even in the workplace, for example, sending a request by email gives people a bit of time so they can, think about whether they do have the capacity to help you with your project. And, the chances are that they really will try to help you if they possibly can. But if they're really going to struggle, it just allows them to back out without kind of agreeing too quickly. So that's the kind of thing that we should be doing. I also think it goes both ways again, so if we are going to use MI to benefit ourselves, we should also be very generous with our own time and resources for other people and not resent those kind of requests for help either. And, the great thing is, like I mentioned earlier, that when we do act altruistically to other people, it's definitely very good for our health and well-being. So there are selfish motives for being altruistic, basically. But ultimately, I just think, acting to others in the way that we want them to act to ourselves is always a good principle.
Yeah, absolutely. Respect and this mutual respect is just the underlying magic behind all of it. If you use these things to manipulate, to come out as the winner, you might be lucky once, twice, thrice, but at one point, the entire house of cards just comes crumbling down. So better to build this on just a really solid foundation of being a good human being.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it. I think morally, we shouldn't be trying to manipulate other people. But I think practically speaking, we're much more likely to live the kind of life that we want to live and to achieve our goals if we form these authentic, genuine relationships with people where it's based on trust and honesty. Ultimately, you're probably still going to get exactly what you want, but you're also going to benefit from the social connection. You're going to live amongst people who are much happier. You're going to have longer lasting relationships too.
All right. Thank you so much, David, for your time. Where would you like to send our listeners that now want to hear more from you, about you?
So listeners should be able to find my book wherever they normally buy all of their literature. So it will be available on Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble. Any book supplier should be able to stock the Laws of Connection. You can find more about me and the book at my website, davidrobson.me. I'm on Twitter, D_A_Robson, and I'm on Instagram, slowly building up my following at David A. Robson. I really love hearing feedback from readers and listeners. So please do get in touch.
Thank you so much, David. I will make sure that we put all of that in the show notes as well, so everyone has easy access to your newly minted Instagram account and give you some social media love. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for writing this absolutely brilliant book.
Thank you. It is completely my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.